alone with my favorite book, Broadway Musicals of the 1940s. No roommate to bother me. How could it get any better than this?
Hi, Rod.
Hi, Nicky.
Rod, you will never guess what happened to me at the Musical Talk studio today. I had this really nice chat with this guy called John Tartaglia. He was lovely. We talked for such a long time about so many different musical theatre topics.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, he was being really friendly, and I think, it's a great interview, and I really think you should sit down and listen to it.
So why are you telling me this? Why should I care? I don't care. What'd you have for lunch today?
I'm just trying to tell you about, Musical Talk. You don't have to get all defensive about it.
I'm not getting offensive! Oh, why do I care about some guy you met, okay? I am trying to read.
Okay, you weirdo, but you're going to miss a really, really great interview.
Well, I do not want to talk about it, Nicky. This conversation is over.
It's
over!
Freak.
This is Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. I'm delighted to be joined on the telephone by a wonderful star of TV and stage, Mr. John Tartaglia. Hi, John, how are you doing?
Hi, Nick, how are you?
I'm very, very well, thank you. Thank you for coming on Musical Talk.
I am glad to be here, thank you.
I just sat down and watched my first ever episode of Johnny and the Sprites. Well, it was half an episode, I think. I don't know what happened. It seemed to have missed. It was a 15-minute section. The Sprites were having a sleepover.
Oh, right, of course I remember that one.
I was very excited to see that Stephen Schwartz wrote the theme tune to this show.
He did. I was having dinner with Stephen. He's become kind of a friend of mine, and this was probably about a year after Avenue Q and the Tonys and everything. And I had mentioned that I was, working on developing this TV show, and I told him the whole story of how the show happened and everything, and he said, well, you've mentioned having Broadway composers write the music, and he said, I'd love to write something for you. I said, oh, sure. And he said, in fact, I'd love to actually write the theme song. And I was like, well, sure. I mean, it's Stephen Schwartz. What am I going to say? No, of course not. So it was really an honor. I mean, I feel so lucky to be friends with Stephen because I think he's such an amazing person. But then to have someone, like Stephen Schwartz, say they want to write your children's television theme song was such an honor. So, yeah, it was kind of a wonderful way it all worked out. And I remember the day that he sent me the demo in an email, and to open your AOL inbox and to see, an original song from Stephen Schwartz for you was just a kind of mind-blowing. So
yeah, I could only imagine the feelings. Was it then he had the biggest show on Broadway at the moment?
You mean with Wicked?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Wicked and Avenue Q had opened at the same time, or around the same time, and so we both kind of went through that whole Tony Award season and all that together. So, yeah, so, I mean, his show was, Wicked was huge and as popular then as it is now, and, it was just really cool to have that kind of relationship, and even though we were from two different shows, we were working together as one on Johnny and the Sprite, so that was cool.
We're all one community in this business, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many people, but it really is like the smallest. Everyone kind of calls it like the smallest, biggest community in the world, because everyone knows each other and everyone, in some way or another, has worked together. But it's a very interesting, way that it's all set up.
It's like Cheers. Everyone knows your name.
Exactly. But less drinking. Well,
yes.
Maybe more. I don't know.
Who knows? Then I was reading about Johnny and the Sprites, and then I see that your sister is actually Sutton Foster.
Yes.
Which brings us quite neatly to your project at the moment, which is Shrek, which we've talked about before on the podcast. Great fun show for you to be involved in. How did this come about for you? Yeah,
it's really a blast. I mean, it's funny, actually, that you mentioned Sutton, in the sense that she did Sprites way before we ever even knew Shrek was on the radar, either of us. And so that was just kind of a happy accident. And then Chris Sieber, who plays Lord Farquaad in Shrek with me, also did an episode of Johnny and the Sprites way before Shrek happened, and we actually have known each other for quite a long time and have been very good friends and have been, kind of musing on how much fun it would be, and then, Shrek comes along and here we are. So it was just kind of funny to look back now at Sprites and go, oh yeah, I mean, something told me maybe subconsciously that Sutton and Chris and I would work together someday, so they'd be fun to work with on Sprites. So
all these freaks living together in a forest, it's all come back to haunt you, really.
Exactly. Exactly.
Our reviewer who went to see Shrek absolutely loved it. He said there wasn't, one, as regards to production, there wasn't one unentertaining moments on the whole stage, and the energy and the perfection of the production just really shone to him. He actually said it's one of the best productions he's seen in a long, long time. And this guy, this guy's a frequent Broadway goer. I think he sees about 500 shows a week.
Oh my God! Well, if he can do that, then I hope he's got a good income.
Yeah, but it sounds so, because I remember watching the Shrek movies. I haven't seen the third one, but watching the first and second, almost screaming for a song to be at this point.
Yeah.
Because it's such perfect material, fairy tales, and it's... So you play Pinocchio. Mm-hmm. You play the Magic Mirror, which we'll get onto in a bit.
Right.
Do you play anyone else?
I puppeteered the dragon in the show, the big giant dragon. I puppeteer that. And those are my three kind of main things I do in the show, yeah. So I get to kind of do a bunch of different things.
Your background's in puppeteering. You did Sesame Street at age 18, didn't you?
Actually, age 16, believe it or not. Yeah,
sorry.
But I have always had a kind of love and balance between my puppetry and my acting. And so, with Avenue Q, that was really kind of like the ultimate way to bring both of those things together, and I never thought that would happen again for me, especially on Broadway. And then, of course, with Shrek, it's kind of in a very different way, but in also a very similar way, I'm getting to do both of my loves again, too. So it's kind of neat to be able to I guess, someone said recently I'm like the go-to puppet man on Broadway. I don't know what that means, but I guess that means that if you need a puppet performed in a show and I happen to fit a role, then I'm the one to go to. But yeah, it's neat to be able to kind of use all my skills, and it certainly keeps it interesting for me, yeah.
All we need now is another Little Shop of Horrors revival, and you can be Audrey too.
Exactly. That's the next one.
You sort of have a 21st century puppet in Shrek, don't you, with the mirror?
Yeah, the mirror is actually really neat. We spent so much time developing it, doing the out-of-town tryout of Shrek. We were there for 3 months, and they had mentioned that the mirror was eventually going to be a live animation. And I think at the time no one really knew what that meant, and because we were out of town in Seattle, they didn't want to actually put it all up on its feet there and then have to just kind of recreate it in New York. So we started doing a bunch of tests in Seattle, and I got to fly up to Vancouver a couple times to test out this technology. And basically what it is it's a live digital animation, and it's a motion capture, which means, I'm sure you know what it means, but for those listening who don't, it's if you've seen the movie The Polar Express or
Lord of the Rings,
anything that's been done with motion capture, there's basically a bunch of dots that are glued to my face. They're reflective, very special, highly reflective dots. There's 28 of them, I think, actually, that are glued to my face every show. And above the theater in a building, I up about 5 flights, and there is a room that is a motion capture room that I sit in, and there's basically about 17 motion capture cameras that I'm sitting in front of. And long story short, I'm making it more complicated than it really is, I guess, but whatever I do with my face in front of those cameras goes into a computer, and the computer automatically links it to the animated mask in the computer. So essentially I'm kind of puppeteering live through a computer the Magic Mirror mask with my face. And it's never been done before. It's an amazing technology and kind of a breakthrough in the sense that it thankfully, knock on wood, has worked every night. And basically, 5 floors above the theater, I'm performing a character live on stage with the other actors downstairs. So it's pretty amazing.
Now, what's Plan B if it doesn't work?
But there's a backup plan. We do have a videotaped version of it. So if they know right before we start that, it's not going to work, or the camera's not working, or the computer's down, they can kind of go to that as a backup, which we haven't had to do yet, knock on wood. So I think it says a lot for the creators of the system that, over 100 shows in, it's been successful. So it's pretty amazing.
What would be a nice idea if you had a sort of camera that linked to the couple of front rows of the auditorium, and you could sort of speak to the audience as they were taking their seats?
Actually, believe it or not, it's funny you say that. We do have that.
Okay.
The original intention of the mirror, besides being part of the show in the scenes, we were going to have an intermission portion where the Magic Mirror would actually interact with the kids in the audience and bring a kid up on stage and talk to him. And it might so happen someday, but, unfortunately, like a lot of things, sometimes time and time and availability are our greatest enemy in theater, and so we ended up actually not having time to implement that. But yeah, there's actually a camera I have that can scan the whole audience which I, of course, now use completely and totally just to look for celebrities and my friends when they come to see the show to watch to see if they're enjoying it. So it's completely become like this invasive camera that I use. So a lot of people ask why we do it live every night if we're not using the interactive features that it was originally designed for. And basically the excuse that Jason Moore, our director, gives, which I think is very valid, is having it be live only makes it much more of a real experience for the audience, because you can always tell when something's videotaped. There's always that kind of, what's the word I want?
Delay.
Rehearsed version. Yeah, that it has to come through the same every time. And what's great is that now that it's a live thing, if Chris S. Farquaad says something to throw me off, or if someone goes up on one of their lines, or if something happens on stage, or if a kid yells something, or whatever, I'm able to react. And so it really keeps kind of a fresh perspective. And I think it's really neat because even though the audience may not know, there is something about that mirror that's startlingly lifelike because of that. So it's pretty neat.
It must be quite creepy as well if you weren't expecting this effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's people will come and sit and watch the scene, and they'd be kind of weirded out because I'd be able to talk back to Jason, our director, or because I had that camera that could scan the audience, I could see where like someone was sitting and make it look like the mirror was looking right at them and talking to them, and it's kind of a weird thing to be able to do, but people seem to think it's pretty neat.
Are there any rumors of the show coming to the West End at all?
I know that they've talked about it. I think that the show, because Shrek is such an incredibly popular franchise and people know it so well. I think that there's little doubt in my mind that it will make it overseas for sure. I think that I think it's the kind of show that will appeal to everybody, and luckily everyone knows it so well.
It's just a hard time at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because we're kind of lucky on Broadway considering how horrible the economy is, and it's a hard time, and luckily, even though I think that sometimes the press has made it out to be a lot worse than it is, Broadway's actually doing pretty well, and it's just a matter of keeping people coming to see the shows. And I think what's great is that entertainment seems to always be the most successful thing during hard times because it's escapism. And I think that people want to get away and they want to have a good time, and that's actually something about Shrek that I love, is that people come and there is so much crap going on in the world that's just bringing everyone down, and to be able to come to Shrek and kind of escape in a fairy tale for 2 hours is, I think, for a lot of people, really wonderful.
It's almost like a sort of second 9/11 phase, because after 9/11, that was when the big musical comedy boom on Broadway took off, with Little Shop of Horrors and The Producers and Spamalot and Avenue Q and all these great shows, and now it's sort of, people are depressed again.
Well, it's like you want that pickup, and you want. I mean, I actually don't think that shows like Hairspray and Avenue Q and Spamalot and all the shows would necessarily have done as well as they did if it hadn't been that people were really searching for something like that. It's kind of like I remember when the movie Beverly Hills Chihuahua came out over here, which I don't know if it's been over there yet, but it was basically just a fluffy kids movie about talking chihuahuas, and it did a humongous business at the box office here for like 3 weeks, and everyone was like, wow, what's going on? And basically it came down to people were looking to get away and to go with their families and go do something mindless and fun and escape, because it was kind of right when the economy was taking its worst turn, and I think people were looking for something to get away from. So I think that theater provides that, and I think the Shrek especially has been great for that, because it is, it's a wonderful kind of feel-good show, and people come in having the weight of the world on their shoulders, and hopefully they leave just having a blast.
What are some stand-up moments for you in the show that maybe you just can't control yourself, and maybe you've corpsed, and I'm not saying you're unprofessional and that you corpse every time, but from what I've seen of the show, it just looks so funny.
Yes, it is, and actually we're a really funny cast. I mean, I think that what's amazing about this cast is that Jen Cody, who plays the elf in the show and is one of our amazing ensemble members and dancers and does everything, she says that we're kind of the Rolls Royce of a Broadway cast. I guess what she means by that is that everyone in the show was specifically picked because of each of their individual talents. So everyone from Brian and Shrek all the way down to every swing, every ensemble member, everyone was picked because they are the best at what they do. And so we're all I guess, really funny people. And the blessing of that is that we have a great together. The curse of that is we end up making each other laugh probably way too much. And we're certainly guilty of sometimes being lunatics on stage and cracking each other up. And Dennis Stowe, who plays Papa Bear, who is amazing in the show and one of my favorite people, he is so easy to make laugh on stage. And Chris Ebert kind of describes it as a wounded antelope, because it's like it's so easy just to take advantage of that and to to get that person to laugh. So probably more often than not, especially when the fairy tale creatures are out there, we're trying to get Dennis to laugh, and we're making him go up, as they say. But yeah, we have a lot of fun. I actually really love playing Pinocchio for that reason, because I get to basically be a complete asshole for 2 hours and play this character that is so ridiculous and so wonderfully over the top, and it's fun, and we kind of keep discovering new things every day.
There's some risky stuff. I mean, because I've heard the songs, and there's some cross-dressing wolves, and you say crap at one point. I don't know why. It's at the end of
I do, yeah.
Story of My Life. But I mean, so the show's obviously gearing towards adults, and there's lots of musical theatre references in the show, isn't there, as well?
There are, yeah. We do some kind of nods to Wicked and to Lion King and to Chorus Line and to a lot of different shows, and it is kind of. I mean, I think one of the greatest things that came out of the show. I don't know if you remember watching the Muppet Show, but the thing that the Muppet Show did so brilliantly was it was humor that was for everybody. And they really made an effort to make sure that the show worked on all levels. And I think that's something that we did with Shrek. Was there are a lot of shows on Broadway that parents can take their kids to, and the kids will have a great time, not enjoy it as much or not feel as included, and. The movies of Shrek, what they do very well, of course, is appeal to everyone, appeal to every generation. And so with the musical, they really worked hard to do the exact same thing, to make a show that appeals to everybody. So, there's jokes for the adults, there's jokes for the preschoolers, I mean, one of the things I think is amazing about Shrek, actually, is a lot of our audience is preteens and teens. And for that matter, preteen and teen boys, which are not usually a huge musical theater going crowd. So that's been really kind of neat to see too. And there's definitely stuff for everybody. I think that we're probably one of the first family shows to use the word crap. But it's again, I think it's kind of done in a way that's innocent. It's I don't know. I think it works really well, and it's nice to see it kind of appealing. I remember there was a family who came who I know very well who. Literally there was, a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 19-year-old, and then, 2 parents, and every one of them said they loved the show for different reasons. So I think that's great. I hope that tends to be what people look at it as, as a great family show that's not just for kids.
John, you've been busy with your camera checking out the market research, I see, when you're up in your room.
When I'm in the magic mirror?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I wish I could. No, I'm all alone and sadly in the dark there with just my little audience camera and my computer cameras. It's kind of like being in some sort of science fiction movie, actually, with these dots on your face and dressed in black and sitting in front of all these infrared cameras.
Reminds me of my high school days.
Yeah. I can't comment on that.
No, neither can I. We've had Jeff Marks on the show, and we've talked about Avenue Q. I mean, the exciting news for London as regards Avenue Q is Cameron Mackintosh had announced its closure, obviously due to troublesome times, and then there are rumours flying around, it's not closing, it's transferring, it's actually transferred, and so Avenue Q is not leaving, which is very, very exciting. Obviously a show that's very close to your heart. We don't need to introduce any listeners to what the concept is or what it's about. But how did your involvement with Sesame Street help you in the development of Avenue Q?
Well, I mean, first of all, I wouldn't have had the job if it weren't for Sesame Street. I mean, I worked at Sesame Street for a number of years, and through Sesame Street, I met a puppeteer named Rick Lyon, who is also one of the original cast members of Avenue Q. He played Nicky and Trekkie Monster originally. And Rick had known Jeff and Bobby through another project they had been working on, and when Avenue Q came about, they were looking for an actor who was kind of the young ingenue type, who also had puppetry experience. And so Rick called and asked if I'd be part of it, and I said yes. So it was really kind of a blessing. I mean, I literally would have never probably known about Avenue Q if it weren't for Sesame Street and having met Rick through there. But it was one of those things where the show evolved over a number of years, and I'm sure Jeff probably told you this, but it wasn't even supposed to be a theater piece. It was supposed to be a television show, and I think that's the main reason why they asked me to be included. Because of my television puppetry, because they were hoping that I would be able to do it, on the television series. And then, of course, as the show evolved, they found out more and more about Stephanie and I, that we also had backgrounds in theater, which I think that, they knew, but they didn't know the extent of that. So, I think that for sure, I know that I wouldn't have had Avenue Q if it weren't for Sesame Street. So it was, kind of a really amazing journey that I started at Sesame Street and then got to Avenue Q and, kept going from there. So I'm very thankful for that.
They're both in the same neighborhood, aren't they? So you're bound to end up in one location or the other.
Yeah, you just have to take the N or the R, the N or the R train, and you'll get to it eventually.
Why do you think Avenue Q works so well everywhere still?
Because I think that its themes are completely universal. I think that everyone, no matter where you grow up, with very rare exceptions, I think that when you're a kid, you're told that everything is going to be fine, and that the world is full of everything, and that you can be anything and you can do anything, which to some degree is true. But then all of a sudden you graduate high school or college or university, and all of a sudden you're on your own, and there's no one there coddling you and paying your bills and taking care of you, and you suddenly have to face the reality of the real world. And I think that that's so daunting, and I think we all have our own ways of dealing with that in our own paths, but I think that that's very universal, and we now, because of the way the world is connected, especially with the internet and stuff like that, we really are, and we all understand each other's worlds a little bit more. And I think that we've all grown up with some version of a Sesame Street or some version of a children's television show that, when you were a kid, was like your biggest worry. Your biggest worry as a kid was, will I don't know, have peanut butter and jelly for lunch today? My favorite thing. I mean, when you're a kid, you don't think about taxes and death and disease and money and insurance and all those things, and all of a sudden that hits you over the head when you're older. So yeah, I think that it's the themes of the show that really resonate, and also honestly, it's such a funny show. I mean, so much of the humor of the show is good classic comedy, meaning that it works no matter what language you speak and no matter where you're from, which I think, to be honest, we were doubtful that it would work anywhere else, because it is, for us, it was such a New York specific show. So it was really kind of wonderful when the national tour went out that it did as well as it did, and when we did it in Vegas that people reacted as well as they did to it, and especially now that it's, overseas. And I was particularly thrilled to hear that it did as well as it did, there in London, because I think that that was a big risk, especially for Cameron, I think, to take, because it is a show that no one really knew how it would do over there, and as Cameron often does, he had a great idea for it and how to make it work there, and so I'm just really happy that it did.
I hear the production on the moon is going to be very popular.
Yes, the Galaxy production of Avenue Q will be very interesting, but it wouldn't surprise me. I'm sure in 100 years if it was still going strong somewhere in the other middle of the galaxy, who knows?
We've had a couple of questions submitted to us. One which caught my eye, which I don't know what it means. Maybe you could enlighten it for me. This is from the musicals.net forum, which is a great place to go and read about musical theatre. This guy's question is it fun to be the Kmart blue light? What the heck does that mean?
Wow! I didn't know wow! How did he find that out? I'm actually the voice of the Kmart blue light bulb. It is fun. It's very odd. It's very kind of I've never done a commercial campaign before, so it's very interesting to be the voice of this little guy. But yeah, I've been doing it for the past 2 years, and it's been a lot of fun. But it is different. I actually sometimes am at home, and the commercials will come on television, and I hear my own voice, and it kind of freaks me out a little bit. And I've had a couple friends be like, I'm getting ready for work. It's 6:30 in the morning, and whatever, and there's your voice. Like, get out of my living room.
You mentioned Lion King earlier. Now, there's a question here about a Lion King audition.
Oh boy, it's a very long story, but I'll try to keep it concise. Basically, when I was 18, I had moved to New York City recently, and I was working on Sesame Street as a puppeteer, but I'd never not wanted to necessarily be a Broadway actor, and I certainly wanted to keep my puppet acting alive. So I started reading Backstage, which is, I think you guys have Backstage over there, right?
We have something called The Stage, which is listings and entertainment magazine.
Oh, okay, so yes, it's basically the same thing we have here, and I got my copy of Backstage, and my mother's an actress, so I knew a lot about acting from her. And so I called her and I said, listen, I want to start auditioning. And she said, okay, we need to get Backstage and, look through there for listings you're right for, and you have to go to auditions. And she kind of gave me a really kind of quick, overview of how to go and audition. But, you don't know a lot when you're 18, and I was certainly, the star of all my high school musicals, and, I thought that was enough. Anyway, long story short, there was an audition for The Lion King, which at the time had not come to Broadway yet, and they were looking for actors, singers, and dancers who could also puppeteer, which, of course, I thought, oh, that's me. So I didn't have a headshot or resume. I went out to the local Port AC and got a photo taken. This is horrible. I mean, why would anyone do this? It was this horrifying photo, and basically I went to the audition the day of with my sheet music, and I went in, and I walked into the room, and there's probably, I'd say 50 to 60 black ladies sitting there. And I, of course, now would go, oh, this is probably not the audition I was supposed to be at, but I walked in as confident as ever and signed my name up, and finally one of the ladies sitting next to me asked, what I was doing there, and I said, I'm here to audition, and she said, well, you know that this is the audition for The Lion King, right? And I said, yes, and she said, well, you know that this is the audition for Rafiki. And, of course, now, at 31, I look back and go, I probably should have stood up and left the room and said, oh, my gosh, I went the wrong day, this is the wrong time, the wrong place, whatever. But I confidently sat there and went, yes, I know.
I can do it.
And so I was just like, well, I guess I'm going to audition with the Rafikis. And so I walked in the room to a bunch of surprised faces and sang my song horribly. I basically made all these huge mistakes that you never do in an audition. And, it was a nightmare audition. And the people actually behind the table who were auditioning could not have been nicer. And all the ladies in the room auditioning for Rafiki were so supportive and so sweet. I think they thought I was this sweet, adorable little boy at 18 who has no idea what he's doing. And so, yeah, that was my very first professional New York audition. Needless to say, I did not get the job. But years later, when I did Beauty and the Beast a couple years ago, I actually told Tom Schumacher, who's the head of Disney Theatricals, that story, and he was rolling and laughing and said that apparently the casting directors for Lion King talk about that story. I don't know if that's true, but so I always tell that story at high schools, and when I do talk, if I can make it on Broadway after that, anyone can.
The Tartaglia tale of
it's horrible. I mean, it's actually even more detailed than that, but it's such a when you're that young, you don't even, you just have stars in your eyes and you don't realize what you're doing. And I've certainly learned a lot since then. So it was a good lesson in humility.
But I could see you play either Timon or Pumbaa because they're the Caucasian comedy duo of the show, aren't they?
Yeah, I've always kind of wanted to play Timon. And, I think that Julie Taymor's style of puppetry, she is very, and I respect this, she has a very specific way she wants that show to be performed, and I think because of my work with the Muppets, I think that maybe she doesn't think of me as that kind of puppeteer. I'm not sure. It's actually very interesting. So maybe someday I'll do it, but that being said, I think the show is just, is it still playing over there?
Yes, it is. It's celebrating its 10th year, I think, this year.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I would love to. I didn't get a chance to see it when I was over there, but it'd be great to go see it over there. It's a great show. It really is a great show.
I'll ask you about Beauty and the Beast. Was this, I presume this was on Broadway?
Yes, it was.
It's now one of the longest running Broadway musicals there's ever been, and it's I still think it's Disney's greatest theatrical triumph. He's a sort of puppet in a way, isn't he?
Lumiere?
Yeah.
To some degree he is, yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough to be one of the last people to play it on Broadway. I was supposed to be the very last Lumiere, but I was going into the second season of Johnny and the Sprites, and I just couldn't make the two schedules work. But so I was like the next to last person to play him, which is really neat. He's a character. I mean, the amazing thing about it was I had always dreamt about playing that role. It was one of those things when I came to New York City, at 18 and saw all the Broadway shows. It was one of the shows that I really loved, and I really loved Lumiere. And it was one of those roles I thought, oh, I'd love to play that. When I was doing Avenue Q in Las Vegas, the assistant company manager and I became very good friends, and we were talking one day, and he kind of casually said, if you could play any role on Broadway, what would it be? And I mentioned a few, but one of the first ones I mentioned was Lumiere. And he said, really? I said, yeah, it's like I've just always wanted to play that role, and I just think it's me, it's who I am, and I love that kind of optimism, and but it was just talking as a friend. About 2 years later, I got a call from Duffy, is his name, the assistant company manager at that time of Avenue Q, who then had ended up being Tom Schumacher's assistant at Disney Theatricals, and he said, remember that conversation we had a couple years ago about, roles you'd want to play? I said, yeah. He said, well, would you still be interested in playing Lumiere? And I kind of, took a deep breath and said, yes. And he said, well, we want you to come do Lumiere. So it was kind of an amazing experience to kind of, casually throw that out as a possibility someday, never thinking it was going to happen, and then, being asked to come do it. So it was wonderful. I actually really loved my time playing that role. It was one of my favorite experiences ever. Because
I saw it on Broadway, I think, in 2005, during the first act. You just sit there and wait for Be Our Guest. Because
yeah, I mean, he basically, it was the first time, Avenue Q, I never stop. It's that playing Princeton and Rod, you're literally going around the entire show back and forth, and you have like 1 minute and a half break the whole show. And with Beauty and the Beast, it was, Lumiere, he's definitely present in the show, and he's in the show quite a bit, but it's spaced out. And in the first act, you have a good 25, 30 minutes you're not on stage. And so, yeah, it was kind of interesting to go through that, to kind of have, the complete opposites, have one track where you don't stop, and then you go to Beauty and the Beast, where you have all this time, but then I get to come out and Be Our Guest, which is, such a showstopper, and it was great.
I remember my question from earlier, and what are all these great Muppet movies, the Muppets Take Manhattan, and Muppet Christmas Carol, and even the thing at Disney World and Disneyland and whatever incarnations around the world. What about Muppets on Broadway? Do you think this will ever happen?
I do. I think that it's funny that you say that, because it's something that I know that they've worked on. Even when Jim Henson was still alive, he always really dreamed about having Muppets on Broadway, and had worked up a bunch of different ideas. And I think at one point they were literally talking about doing a version of the Muppet Show on Broadway, like the Muppet Show. For whatever reason, it never panned out. To be honest, I don't even know, back in the time when Jim was still around, if people would have taken it as seriously and as much of a possibility as it is now. Because I don't think the family entertainment, especially, was really as available on Broadway back then. I mean, if you think about it, in the 80s and 70s, what was there really for kids on Broadway, with the exception of maybe Your Good Man Charlie Brown or Cats? I mean, that was kind of it. There was nothing else. So, it never really happened. And actually, one of the nicest things that came out of Avenue Q is Jim's widow and daughters came to see the show, and one of the things that they kind of gave their blessing. And then Jerry Joel, who was one of the head writers and very close to Jim Henson, the nicest thing he basically said to us after the show was, Jim always dreamt about having a show on Broadway, and in some way this is kind of what this is. So, it was neat. It kind of felt like we were bringing a part of Jim to Broadway, even though he never himself got to do it, and the Muppets to Broadway in a way. And I think because of Avenue Q and because of so many other shows that have featured puppets recently, like Lion King and now Shrek, and I think that it's more of a possibility than ever. So I hope that they do it. I think that it seems kind of silly not to. It's such a great form, and the Muppets have always been so theatrical. Again, with the Muppet Show taking place inside of an old vaudeville theater, I think it kind of lends itself to being a live theater show. So we'll see. I hope so.
They're now owned by Disney, and obviously big presence on Broadway, but also with the theme park links, with the things like the advanced animatronics, which are now free walking. I don't know if you've seen the Bunsen and Beaker things at the park. Surely with that technology, it's a sort of, that's what it's gearing toward. I would hope so.
I think that it's full of possibilities, and I think that what's like something even like with the Magic Mirror and Shrek. I mean, that's going to open up a lot of doors as far as to what you could do with technology and interactivity between an audience and a fictional character, and I think the Muppets definitely lend themselves to that. So I think I hope that Disney and the Muppets will kind of find a way to bring them to Broadway, because I think that they would work brilliantly. I really do.
You were dying to know how your nose grows.
You know what? I'm actually not allowed to tell you. I'm literally not allowed to tell you. So what I can say is it's DreamWorks magic.
Yeah.
I can tell you this much. That is that I do it myself. It's not a remote control. It's something that I actually do. I signed my life away. I'm not allowed to tell you.
It's not caused by an attractive woman that walks in the room, then, is it?
Well, I'll answer for myself, no, but maybe for Pinocchio, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, because in the movie he's quite horny, isn't he?
I mean, it's funny. We were given such free reign with the development of the characters on Broadway. I think that's actually a really nice gift. We weren't forced to make them like the movie really at all. I think that they wanted it to be familiar. I think that, if Pinocchio had come out with this James Earl Jones type, bass voice, it would have been a little upsetting. But, yeah, a little different take on it. But, yeah, we were definitely given free reign. And I think in the movie, he was kind of this randy, kind of blatantly sexual character, actually. But in the show, he's much more kind of, I call him just crazy. He's just kind of crazy, and he's a little dark, and he's a little twisted, and he's a little angry, and it's actually very fun to play that. So yeah, I think it's kind of gone from this horny Pinocchio to much more of a kind of something's going on. He needs a little help.
It'd be great if we could sort of put him on the phone for the moment.
Oh, you can definitely talk to Pinocchio if you'd like.
Put him on the phone then.
Okay, hold on a second.
Hello?
Hi, Pinocchio. How are you doing at the moment?
Who is this?
You're Southern. You're meant to be Italian.
Well, I do have a little bit of an accent, yes. You see, my original wood was shipped over from Tennessee to Italy, so, I have a little bit of Southern in me.
What's your sort of goal in the story of Shrek?
Well, Nick, let me lay it on the line for you. What's happened is, basically, me and the other fairy tale creatures, we have been kicked out of Duloc, which is the kingdom that Lord Farquaad, is trying to reign over. We have been kicked out of there because we're fairy tale creatures, and he thinks we're a bunch of freaks. And so they kicked us out. They put us on Shrek's Swamp, which none of us want to be at. We all just want to go home to our places, And so it's really about us, finally realizing that we have to stand up for ourselves and be proud of who we are, and then, eventually go home and take over Duloc and be who we are and reign once again.
You have to let your freak flag fly.
Oh, yeah. It takes a little while for me to realize it, but I eventually realize it.
That's great. Well, I'm sure we'll come and see you on Broadway soon. Thanks, Pinocchio.
I hope you do. I mean, you've been saying that for a long time, Nick. I haven't seen you.
I'm waiting for my free ticket.
Okay, I gotta go. Bye-bye.
Hi, sorry about that.
It's okay. That was interesting.
Schizophrenic, really.
That kind of improvising, are you allowed to go that far on stage?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, David Lindsay Bear, our book writer, he's such an amazing comedy writer, and he actually loves the fact that we're all so free, and especially Chris Sieber, and I guess to some degree me too, but probably to a lesser degree. We've been given a lot of free reign. We're not really allowed to come up with a lot of lines on our own, but sometimes if something strikes, that moment we use a different reaction or, add a little emphasis onto something that isn't usually there. And, I think the really funny thing is that because so many of us in the show have improv backgrounds, in the few times we've been interviewed as the characters, we've been kind of allowed to make them seem completely real and make you kind of just suspend disbelief. And, it's not so much, here's an actor playing this character. It's, we're going to actually interview Pinocchio. We're going to actually interview Shrek. We're going to actually interview Farquaad. So it's been nice. I think actually my favorite thing that's happened so far is that one night the turntable didn't work in the show. And
by turntable, you mean a technical device on the stage, not actually a vinyl record player?
No, yes, the entire show plays from a turntable record. No, we actually have a very sophisticated set, and we have 3 interlocking turntables on the stage that kind of serve to kind of move everything fluidly throughout the show, and it's actually never been done before. And there's 5 elevators within those things. I mean, it's really kind of amazing. Anyway, long story short, one day it didn't work for the first time ever for like 20-25 minutes. We were trying to figure it out, and so there was a delay starting the show, and Brian, who plays Shrek, and Daniel, who plays Donkey, went out to the front of the stage and just kind of started entertaining the audience as their characters. And then eventually Chris and I joined in as Pinocchio and Farquaad. And it was fun because it was like 25 minutes of just improvising with the audience and making up things and joking around. And it was really fun for us because we don't usually get a chance to do that. So it was neat to be able to, even before the show starts and these people don't know who the characters are, kind of come out and make the audience believe that they're real and interact with the audience. So that was really fun. But yeah, we don't get to do as much improv as I think we'd love to do.
Well, now that Shrek is this living entity, I mean, compared to the movies, which are always great in sort of very modern pop references and pop culture references, what I hope they will do with Shrek on Broadway and wherever else it ends up is the book writer every month, would come back and sort of add a pop culture joke here and a pop culture joke there. Is that going to happen, do you think?
I don't think that's the plan. I mean, I think what's nice about the show is, it's certainly adaptable. I think that some of the jokes might, eventually change or evolve. I mean, I know that's certainly never been something that they've said, we're going to do this. But, I think because it's the kind of show it is, it could be. Although I will say that, one of the things that they were very careful about in creating the musical of Shrek as opposed to the movie is the movies are so pop culture referencey, and make a lot of references to celebrities of the time or situations. And one of the things that the musical does actually is makes the story a little more timeless. Even though we have some references, of course, to Wicked and Chorus Line of Lion King, there are no celebrity references, and there's nothing. We don't make a joke about Brad and Angelina or about Obama. We don't. We really they stayed very far away from that. And I think it's really to make it the show. First of all, for the audience to get lost in the story, so that you're not constantly being pulled out by current everyday references, but also I think so the show will work, in 5, 6, 7 years, and it won't have to constantly be changed. One of the things that is a great example of that is like with Avenue Q in the lyrics in the finale For Now, we had that great lyric, George Bush is only for now. And of course, now that we have a new president here, they had a contest to kind of change the lyrics and for people to come up with what else could be for now. And so people came up with the recession and your mother-in-law and a bunch of different ideas, and they were all really funny. And then it ended up being the thing that still worked the best was George Bush, because it's still, even 3 years from now, the fact that he was only for now still makes it funny. Although, you know what, honestly, with the amount of creative people involved and, quite frankly, the creativity that exists within the group that created the show, it wouldn't surprise me if in 3 or 4 years, or even sooner, they came in and said, why don't we change this around and make this more this and more that? Or, it's definitely... It's becoming more common nowadays for shows to actually kind of revise themselves. I know that after we did the Las Vegas production of Avenue Q, some of the changes we made in Las Vegas ended up working their way into the Broadway version. So, and that was, 3 years after the show had been opened. So I think that it sometimes happens that way.
And especially when Avenue Q went over to London and Cameron made lots of changes, they then went into all other productions as well. So maybe if and when Shrek comes to London, they'll make changes, tighten jokes up, whatever, and then put it back into Broadway and wherever else the show ends up.
Yeah, I mean, and the reality is, when you're working on a Broadway show, time and money, frankly, are always your kind of enemy. And there's a lot of time. I don't think that anyone ever walks away from a Broadway show, any creative person, and goes, that's the show, it's perfect, don't ever change it. I think that, even the greatest directors, even the greatest shows, they look at it and go, oh, I wish we had time to put this in, or I would have changed this, or I would have redone that. And so I think now when people have the ability to do that and the opportunity to do that, they are taking more advantage of it, because it just makes the show even better. And, even something like, I know the Parade was over at the Donmar Warehouse, which was a show that was here on Broadway, which I loved very much. And, I recently listened to the Donmar recording, and I was really interested in all the different changes they had made. And, knowing Jason Robert Brown, knowing that he was like, yeah, I liked that song, but it never quite did it for me, it never quite worked. The ability to go back and relook at things now, I think, is quite wonderful. So I hope that, in Shrek's case, they'll always have an open mind to that. And I think knowing Janine and David as the composers and David as the writer, they definitely will keep their eyes open for that.
A musical is never written, only rewritten, is the phrase, I believe.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And it's funny, people have different reactions to it. Some people don't like that. Some people want everything to stay exactly the same as opening night, and some people want it to continue to evolve. And I personally think it's great when you can keep finding new things and, see what works and what doesn't.
How did the show evolve from Seattle to previews to when it was frozen?
Oh, God. It's really truly a night and day show. I mean, I think, we kind of jokingly refer to Seattle as our out-of-town workshop, even though we all did a workshop a year before. The show in Seattle, I would say, was about 3/4 different from the one on Broadway, and it's not really an exaggeration. I mean, it's really evolved greatly, and that's because we were dealing with a lot of unknown factors, a lot of elements Scenically, things that you needed to actually see in a theater running to know if it would work. Musically, concepts, it's everything to kind of go, okay, how is this going to work? And you can only rehearse something inside of a fluorescent lit rehearsal room with no costumes or props for so long to be able to tell if it's going to work or not. Sometimes you do actually just need to see it on a stage with all the technical support and in front of an audience to know if it's going to work. And I think that with this show, that's exactly what this was. We're doing a lot of things that have never been done before. So that being said, also that it's a huge story to try to get through in 2 hours, 15 minutes. And, it was definitely a challenge. I would say literally every day in Seattle, we would get there at, sometimes 10 or 11 in the morning and rehearse all day and then do the show that night and go home and come back and do the exact same thing. So it was a very brutal process, for everyone involved, especially all the crew. They were there so late. But that being said, it was kind of exciting because literally things would change overnight, massive things. Set pieces being completely rebuilt overnight, things, effects added, things taken out, songs going in, a day after they're written, new lines being thrown in at the last minute. It certainly keeps you on your edge as a performer. And that was all just in Seattle. And then when we came back to New York, we had an additional 3 weeks in the rehearsal studio to implement even more changes, and then got on stage and had another 3 weeks of tech, and then during our preview process kind of went through it all over again and put in new things. I mean, one of the things that we always say that it's completely true, even though it sounds crazy, is we changed the opening number 21 times. There are literally 21 different versions of the opening number. And, I actually think that it's a huge testament to David and Janine and our producers and Jason, our director, that many changes were made, because sometimes with shows, especially when they do out-of-town tryouts, whether it's time or money or whatever, there are obvious flaws with the show, and people just go, well, it's a problem, but we just can't, we don't have time or whatever, we're going to have to leave it as is. And we never did that. I mean, we really worked literally up until opening night to make the show the best it could be and put in new things. I mean, in the week before opening night alone, we put in a new opening, a new finale, a new transition, a new scene. I mean, we really worked hard. And so it was hard. It was very hard work because literally you never knew what show you were doing. And sometimes to make your mind to be even more screwed up, you would rehearse something in the morning that was not going to go in until the next night, but it was a version of a song that you're about to sing live in front of an audience, but you're going to do the old version tonight, do the new version tomorrow, and you have to kind of remember what's new. It really messed you up a couple times because you were like, what are we doing? But I don't know. I think that's exciting. I think that's the most fun part about creating a new show, is kind of putting all the elements together and finally waiting to see what kind of blossoms from it. And again, Janine and David's credit, they would literally sometimes write a song overnight that would blow you away. And you'd be like, how did you just come up with that in 6 hours? And of course it would end up being, one of the best parts of the show. So it was a very intense time. It was, I think I would love actually to see a video of like opening, first preview in Seattle, opening night in Seattle, first preview in New York, and opening night in New York, and just compare the four, because I bet they would be completely all different. I mean, and again, I think the crew got the worst of it because we have union rules, we can only be there for so long, and, there's a certain amount of, we can't go any further than this or that. And the crew, I mean, they're such hard workers, and they would be there all night, and literally they'd sometimes work from 8 in the morning till midnight, and come back and do the exact same thing, for 2 weeks in a row. And it's hard. I mean, we were in Seattle, which is a beautiful city during the summer to be in, and a lot of us didn't see it at all.
Nothing beats, once it's all done, standing back and shaking hands with the person next to you and saying, we've done it. This is what we've sweated blood and tears over for the past bloody year and a half, and here it is,
Oh yeah, I mean, we all kind of had that reaction. I mean, it was, for some, we had 5 or 6 cast members making their Broadway debuts, and that was very emotional. But opening night was emotional for all of us, because I think we were all we were tired, and we were overwhelmed, and we were stressed, and we were excited, and it was a very emotional thing because a lot of people had been with the show. I joined during the workshop, which was a year ago from this past November, but a lot of the cast members, or a good handful of them, had been doing it since the first reading, almost 3.5 years previous. So for them, they really saw the show go through every possible version and every conceivable change it could go through. So for them, it was even more emotional because they knew what had been there, what was different, knew what was the same, and it's definitely it's a teamwork. Everyone has to work together to make the best possible show they can make, and so you just kind of hope that it's where it should be. And I think the show has gotten a lot of it's been kicked around a lot because I think that people come in already with their preconceptions about what it's going to be, and that if you're going in to see the show to have a good time and you know what you're in for, you're going to have a great time. If you're coming in expecting Hamlet or Oklahoma, you're going to be disappointed, and I think that people tend to expect that.
Or even if you come in expecting Shrek the movie on stage.
Right, and I think that being said, you have to at least know what you're in for. And I mean, I've had people come and see the show and say, "Oh, I can't believe it. There's farting on stage," and I'm like, "Well, it's Shrek." I mean, that's what the movie is about. There's definitely a farting, burping element to the movie, and I think if you don't know that, it's kind of, well, I guess if you do know that and you're shocked, then that's one thing. But if I don't know, it's interesting to watch different people's reactions. And also, I think in America we're sometimes a little too puritanical and closed off in that way, and afraid of laughing at things like that. So
one thing I wish they did do in the score was musicalize the burp and fart duet, because I think that could have been a lot more. I'm not putting Janine and Tesori down, because I think I have immense appreciation for her and her extreme musical talent, but I sat there thinking this could be a fugue or something, something like that.
Well, again, I think it was that challenge of balance. I think you didn't want to make it. We had actually in the beginning of when the show first started, previews in Seattle, there were a lot more burps and farts in the show, and the show actually used to end with a fart. I think it became that perfect. We had to find that balance between, okay, it's a part of who they are, it's part of the show, it's part of the what people know of the character, but we didn't want to make it so much a part of it that it overwhelmed it. Because at the end of the day, farting is a cheap laugh. It's a funny laugh, but it's a cheap laugh. It's an easy getter. And I think that, it was that balance between too much, too little. And I think they did a good job at that. I think that, I don't doubt, however, that your suggestion was definitely thought about. So, who knows?
That's nice. How long are you contracted to be in this role?
As of now, I will be there through November of this year. What
are the things you've seen that, in the past or ever, that really have spoken to you or made you cry or laugh or whatever?
Well, definitely, I think I mentioned it before, Parade. Parade was a very important show to me. So I love Parade. I love Jersey Boys. Thought Jersey Boys was great. I thought that The Lion King is fantastic. I really like Wicked. There's a lot of great shows. The funny thing about Broadway right now is I think people complain about it, of course, as you know, because I'm sure you read some of the message boards and stuff like that. But you hear people complaining that Broadway is, it's only this or it's only that, and how Broadway's gone downhill. And the funny thing about that is I think it actually couldn't be more varied right now and have more to offer. Look at this Broadway season. You have West Side Story, you have Guys and Dolls, you have 9 to 5, you have Shrek, you have Next to Normal, you have, so many different kinds of shows, everything from rock shows to beautiful revivals of shows. You just have everything. And looking at the kind of genres, you have In the Heights and Avenue Q, and there's just so many different choices. And so it always puzzles me when people say things like, there's no original works on Broadway. Well, yes, there are, and there's nothing for that. No one does the old shows. Well, yes, they are. It just seems like you can't please everybody, and I actually think it's a very exciting time for Broadway. And again, even with the economy, I think someone said there's 22 new shows that are opening just this year alone. So that's pretty phenomenal, and I think it's exciting. I hope that that more people come to see a Broadway show, and that that they realize how lucky we are to have so many different options, plays included. There's so many different kinds of plays on Broadway right now that are phenomenal. So, it's always just frustrating to me when I hear people say things like that. I think that they're, because their favorite show or because something opens that they don't like, they make a generalization about Broadway that I think is really not true at all.
What did you see when you came to London?
I was there for 4 days, and I'd never been before. and it was a surprise birthday trip, and it was unbelievable. First of all, I'm completely in love with London. I want to come live there. So
when was this?
But spread the news around. I want to come work there. But I saw Lord of the Rings. I saw Hairspray because my partner's very good friends with Michael Ball, and I saw oh God, what else did I see? I'm blanking. Sorry. Oh my God. Oh, Billy Elliot. So I saw 3 completely different kinds of shows, and it was fascinating.
2 are still doing very well. 1 is not running, sadly.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, this is coming from someone who's not a Lord of the Rings junkie. I mean, I know that the stories, and I love Tolkien, but I'm not, a huge fan of it. I was actually really impressed with that show, and I may be completely in the minority about that. But I just thought, whatever you thought of it structured as a musical, the production values and the physicalness of it just blew me away. I couldn't get over that. It was such a spectacle, and I really was kind of amazed by that.
I actually think when you talked about the Shrek turntable with the lifts inside of it, it sounds very similar to what they did for Lord of the Rings.
Yes, actually it is similar. It doesn't have the same... I don't think they had the 3 interlocking turntables that we have, but it did have the elevators on the lift that spun. And yeah, I mean, it was. I just thought that show was so beautiful and so gorgeous the way that they did it. I was very impressed with that. So I think that it's always funny to hear how different people react to things. And I loved Hairspray over there. I think they did a great job with that production of Hairspray. And
you were very lucky to go to Lord of the Rings in what is one of my most favourite theatres in the world, the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, which is a phenomenal building.
Oh, and, gorgeous.
And no offence to Broadway, but it's something which Broadway lacks, is these grand, beautiful, palace-like buildings.
Yeah, that was actually something that I commented on when I was there, was one of the things. First of all, I think London in general, the architecture in London is just unbelievable to me. I was really inspired by it. But also, the theaters, they're all these they're palaces. You feel like you're in some sort of... Well, you are. You're in palaces, basically, these grand halls, and I definitely missed that. But when we were in Seattle, actually, we were at the Fifth Avenue Theater, which is this incredible theater, which used to be a movie palace, actually. It has all this beautiful Chinese artwork and carved wood and gold trimmed in the walls, and it was just unbelievable. So in some ways, it kind of reminded me a little bit of a beautiful theater in London. But the other thing you guys have, which I think is so neat, is that the theaters kind of spread out throughout throughout the city. As opposed to Broadway, where it's kind of all contained on 6 or 7 blocks. It's neat that it's all spread out. I think because it kind of infuses the city more a little bit, but. Yeah, it was. I want to go back. I miss it already.
And you have ice creams at the intermission,
which is very exciting to me.
Yeah. Playhouse Disney at the Parks. Now you've done a show for Johnny and the Sprites there, haven't you? What about that coming to the West End or Broadway?
Oh wow. Well, I don't know. The show unfortunately is no longer on the air here in the States, which is ironic because it's all over the world except for here right now. We have like a live version of the show that we've been doing kind of across the country, like concert versions of it, which has done really well. So, if you know anyone over there who wants to have us be there and do like a live concert, we'll do it. You let me know.
I'm sure you will. As I said, I really enjoyed the story I watched today, which was about, well, they're kids, aren't they? I mean, they're sort of young, they're newbies to the world or something, aren't they? These sprites. Yeah,
they're the kind of joke is that they're actually hundreds of years old, but they're probably in their learning very similar to what a child is. And the fact that they didn't know any humans before Johnny is probably why so many things are like that to them. Like a sleepover, they don't know what a sleepover is. They don't even sleep in beds, they sleep in their trees and stuff like that. So we try to find things that would kind of parallel for children like what their first time would be. It reminded me of a sort of preschool version of Third Rock from the Sun. Yeah, exactly. It's that kind of learning new things not because you're necessarily younger or not intelligent, but just because you've never been exposed to it before, and sometimes what that means. We did an episode where the sprites come across a pasta strainer, a colander, and they each think it's something different. They have no idea what it's used for. Ginger thinks it's a helmet for flying, and Basil thinks it's to protect his tomatoes, and Lily thinks it's to search for seashells in her pond, and of course, Johnny finally explains, well, that's not what it's for. It's for this, and so it's the nice lesson we could teach there, for instance, besides the fact that learning for maybe kids too what a strainer is, but also more importantly, it's that everyone can look at something different. The biggest challenge with all that is lining it up to what a preschooler can digest, and understand. So, but yeah, I hope we did a good job of that. We'll see.
One thing which must be in the back of your mind when you worked on this show is that the grown-ups are watching it too, much like Shrek. And what I loved in the episode I saw today was that you were singing the song, and then you said, "Oh no, a key change," which
yes.
A preschooler wouldn't get, but, someone with adequate music training, hence a grown-up, would get. It's a sort of in-musical theatre joke. And was that your input, or the writer's input, or director, or...?
I actually had to fight like hell for that. There are a lot of people who, in the, producing end of the show, on the other side of things, who did not think that would be a good thing to do. And all those little details I had to fight for. And my argument always was, I grew up during the golden time of the Muppets and of Fraggle Rock and Sesame Street and the Muppet Show and all those wonderful shows. And, there are a lot of things that sailed over my head. But, we think, this is always my argument for kids, we think kids are stupid, and they're not. They're actually much more intelligent than we are as adults. I mean, sometimes 3 times as intelligent, and they pick up things a lot more than we think that they do, and they absorb things a lot more than we do. And the way that children's part of the reason I created Johnny and the Sprites was I was and am so tired of children's television being so demeaning and thoughtless, and that everything has to be spelled out for kids for them to understand it. I actually think that kids learn a lot more and grow a lot more by asking questions. I mean, that's how you learn, is to ask questions. And I think that nowadays everything you see for children's television is spelled out for kids, and everything is so overly researched and so overly thought that it becomes mind-numbing, and, kids aren't learning. They're just kind of, it's like brain candy for kids, and you hear people say things like, oh, but they watched, they were so attentive. Well, you know what, just, think about it. If you offer kids vegetables or candy, which one are they going to pick? And so, yeah, they may be watching it, and they may be entertained by it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're learning something. And, you could feed a kid candy, and they may eat it, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be the best thing for them. So, to answer your question, we put a lot of things in there that probably a 4 or 5-year-old wouldn't get, but that moms and dads would. And one of the experiences that stuck out in my brain from being a child was, I don't know if you guys, I'm sure, still have Sesame Street over there, but they used to do all these great parodies on Sesame Street. And they did a great parody of The King and I. And it was literally Grover dressed up like a king, or the king, I guess, from The King and I, and the letter I, and they were dancing. And I remember it coming on, and my mother's, in the back of the living room ironing or doing something and watching the show with me, and I was sitting there watching it, and my mother's in hysterics, and she's laughing at the parody because obviously she knows there's a Broadway musical called The King and I, and she's laughing at the humor in that. But I was laughing at Grover dipping the eye and saying funny things and falling and things like that. So there were 2 completely different levels of comedy that were working there, and I didn't feel not in on the joke. There was no part of me that felt robbed of anything. And so when that argument has come up of, oh, kids won't get it, my argument always is, yes, but the moms and dads will, and they honestly, they're having to sit through these hours and hours of their kids' television shows. They want to be entertained too. So it was really the reason why we fought hard to put those little things in there. But yeah, it's kind of amazing how much people don't trust that nowadays, and they really they want everything to be so spelled out and so simplified and so just kind of benign for kids, and I actually think it's hurting them more than helping them.
Sadly, we don't have when I was younger, we had hour-long episodes of Sesame Street every day at 12:30, which was great.
Right.
Now, it's because of the huge, with cable and digital TV, there's so much competition for all these kids channels. There's no sort of time set for kids nowadays. They can just go off to their channel and watch whatever rubbish the kids are watching nowadays.
That's exactly right.
And
it's hurt everything. It's hurt well, it's kind of like any business. Anytime you have so much of something and so much accessibility, it always gets watered down.
But what we do have now is a British version of Sesame Street with 2 special British characters in it, which I think is quite an interesting idea. I would have much preferred, when I was growing up, to have the original version I did. I have so many great memories. One sketch I remember specifically was this. It was one of the animations between the sort of linking story that you had going on. There was a fish in the sea or a pond or something, and this kid was brushing his teeth and he left the tap on. So the fish,
I love that one, yeah.
So the fish gets his cell phone out, they are way ahead of their time, and calls the kid up and says, look, can you stop draining my water, please? From that night on, I always turn the water off when I brush my teeth.
Yeah, and that's what's amazing is how those things, and I'm sure there was someone when that was being created who said, oh, kids won't get these using a cell phone, kids won't get... it is sad, actually, kind of going off what you said before, because there is so many options now, and there is so much competition that it's not... Children's television isn't focused anymore necessarily truly on educating and making a difference and making kids aware and being socially aware. It's really more, sometimes it's just about the ratings and about, getting the attention. And I think it's quite sad because I think that we're losing the purpose of children's television. Another great example would be, I don't know if you guys have the movie or had the movie Follow That Bird. It was the first Sesame Street movie that was made. They're re-releasing it over here on DVD, so it's kind of popular once again. But it was the first Sesame Street movie. It was made in 1986, and it was before the days, again, of research groups and focus groups and all these other things that we've created. It was a really intense movie. There were some very dark, scary moments in it. There's some things that would never, ever get made today for kids. And yet it still works brilliantly. I remember watching it with my little sister, and she got everything, and she totally wasn't scared of it. She understood it. And I thought, that says a lot to me. And I think that we need to stop, again, questioning the intelligence of kids and stop protecting them from the world and start challenging them a little bit.
One of the best things I remember growing up, and still is around now, which I'm really happy for, is Rugrats. Because they the entire world from a child's perspective, and the quality of that show never ever declined, and there was loads of stuff in the adults for that.
Yeah, and again, that's another great example of someone breaking the mold and taking a chance. And I know for a fact that show was also met with a lot of fear and criticism. And you have to remember also, television was founded by visionaries, and the people who worked in television in the very beginning, they literally, there was no bottom line, there was no stockholders, there was no shareholders, there was no major companies owning it. It was really truly created, the people who really were creating television were creating it as an art and as a medium to do good. And so, all of those shows that we remember that were so ahead of their time, like that, like Rugrats, or not that was back in the days of television, but like Sesame Street, for instance, or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, they were there really to make a difference. And I think that now, with corporations owning stations, with everything being a publicly traded stock, and everyone's answering to things for a different reason than they were before. And it's the reason, to be honest with you, the reason that the internet is going to become the television of our children's lifetime, because it's the only place now that exists where people can actually put original content that isn't dependent on a lot of money out there to make a difference. And actually, one of the things that I hope happens is that someone starts an internet channel for children that just airs original programming for kids, and that is not done through focus groups and is not produced by a major corporation surely just solely for profit. That it really is for good. So we'll see. I think that's what the future is. But we'll see.
Well, you've sort of hit the nail on the head then as regards musical talk. As I said, I don't get paid for this, but yet here we have a great actor and singer taking hours and hours and hours out of his day to talk to us.
You're very sweet. I first of all, thank you. That's very nice of you, actually. But you guys are the reason that we all have jobs. Literally, theater is not like television or movies where someone comes up with $20 million and it gets made and if people see it, oh well. Theater really is dependent on everyone who comes to see it, and it's the same reason why I really believe in going out to the stage door after every show and saying hi to everybody, because literally those people just paid for my life. So thank you. And I feel like it's because of people like you and what you do that the theater lives on, and more generations will appreciate it. So thank you for doing what you do. I know this sounds so like grandma, but times have changed, and it's a different world, and television exists for different reasons, and I think that people aren't really doing the same work anymore. And again, and I can say the experience, getting a television show on the air is so incredibly difficult nowadays because it has to go through so many other facets. Even there's no such thing really as even local programming anymore. You know what I mean? I grew up, even when I was still a kid in the early 80s, there was still regional television and one of my favorite shows growing up as a kid was called Carol and Paula and the Magic Garden. It was produced here by the local station here in New York, and it aired regionally, and I grew up in New Jersey, so I saw it. But, there's no such thing anymore. You can't even get a regionally produced television show or a local show. Everything is bigger and more, and network has to go through this and that and get this approval and that approval. It's just very different. And, in some ways you could argue it's for the better because there's a lot more options because of all the different channels. But I think that, like I said before, everything's been watered down so much, and everything's about beating the competitor or matching the competitor and not about, I don't know, I guess I'm just very protective of children and what children's television does. And the one thing I think that children's television should be doing is entertaining with a message or with some sort of education, and I don't think that there's enough shows that are doing that. So, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. And again, I think that a lot of parents are turning to, frankly, they're renting and buying DVDs of shows that they grew up with that they believe in, and people are going online, searching for online content, again, that people are making that may not be flashy and, high budget, but that is really, really great for kids to watch. So I hope that more and more that becomes the way, and I think it's going to be up to each parent individually to make the best decisions for their kids. I don't think we can trust we can trust television anymore.
One thing I have noticed is, and this is the same goes for Broadway compared to the way the West End and British TV works, is the amount of producers these products have.
Yes. I mean, it's kind of funny when you watch like a sitcom nowadays and it comes on and they list all the producers and there's literally like 25 people. It's very interesting. It's such a different medium, and I'm really kind of fascinated, really truly, to see where it goes in the next 10 years. I really think it's, with DVRs and TiVo and
YouTube,
YouTube and Hulu and streaming content and everything. I think it's going to change what television is.
Well, it's very exciting, and as I continue to be amazed at my podcast, it's we're on the brink of this technology, and the fact that we're able to reach out to people like you and
I mean, and again, I think it's you're doing something you love and you're putting it out there, and I think you're reaching people who don't have. I mean, I wished when I was growing up as a theater fan and as a entertainment fan that I had the internet to go to, because I think it's just amazing how people can connect nowadays and find out about things. And I wish Google had existed when I was 12, so I could look up my favorite Broadway show and learn all about its stars. I mean, all I had back then was the back of cast albums and library books. So it's kind of amazing to see how technology is doing that. And I think it really is people like you and your sites and your work that really allows people to talk. And I mean, if this was a television show, we'd have 45 commercial breaks, and we'd be sponsored by 30 different corporations, and we wouldn't be allowed to say certain things. There's just all those barriers that thankfully don't exist yet on podcasts and things like that. So I think it's great that you're able to reach people like that.
Well, John, that's wonderful. And let me say, we don't have as many commercial breaks here as you do over there, which I'm so happy about.
I know. It doesn't just drive you crazy. It drives me insane.
I was actually trying to watch a tennis match in the States once, and I just had to turn it off because they just kept cutting away every 4 seconds for another sponsorship advert.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think they're all kind of freaking out now because the commercial people, because it is harder to get people to watch now with the advent of TiVo and all that kind of stuff. So I'm interested to see kind of what happens in the next few years, how they start working that in.
Ladies and gentlemen, the wonderful Mr. John Tartaglia here on Musical Talk. Thank you very, very much, John.
Thank you. It was so great to talk to you, and to everyone over there in London. I think you guys are awesome. I want to come be there.
Well, come and be here. We're always open for you.
Well, thank you.
This has been a production of Musical Talk, copyright 2009.